Harappan civilization. You stand on the edge of what was once the greatest city you've never heard of. The year is 1922. Your archaeologist, Sir John Marshall, brushing centuries of dust from perfectly fired bricks. Each brick is identical. Each street runs at precise right angles. The drainage system beneath your feet is more sophisticated than most modern cities. But something is wrong. There are no temples, no palaces, no weapons, no armies carved in stone, no kings demanding worship from tomb walls. This civilization built cities for 500,000 people across territory larger than Western Europe. Then they simply vanished. The Harappan civilization, also known as the Indus Valley Civilization, flourished from 3300 to 1300 before the Common Era across what is now Pakistan and northwest India. Sir Mortimer Wheeler's excavations in the 1940s revealed an empire spanning over 1 million square kilometers with more than 1,000 settlements. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro contained populations estimated at 40,000 each. Dr. Jonathan Markenoyer of the University of Wisconsin published definitive studies in his 1998 work, Ancient Cities of the Indus Valley Civilization, documenting urban planning that wouldn't be matched until Roman times. Here's what makes this impossible. Every Harappan city follows an identical grid pattern. Streets run exactly north-south and east-west. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro is waterproofed with bitumen and measures 39 feet long, 23 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. Houses have private wells and sophisticated drainage systems connecting to covered sewers. Standardized weights and measures are identical across the entire empire. Dr. Gregory Posseil's 2002 comprehensive study, The Indus Civilization, A Contemporary Perspective, documents over 4,000 inscribed seals and tablets, with a script that remains completely undeciphered, despite decades of attempts by linguists worldwide. The mainstream explanation is that the Harappans developed gradually from earlier farming communities, reached their peak around 2600, before the Common Era, then declined due to climate change and shifting river patterns. Archaeological evidence shows the Ghaggar-Hakra river system, which sustained many settlements, began drying up around 1900 before the Common Era. Flooding and tectonic activity may have disrupted trade routes. The civilization simply faded as environmental pressures mounted and people migrated to more hospitable regions. But the uniformity across such vast distances defies this gradual explanation. How does a Bronze Age civilization maintain identical urban planning, weights, measures, and sewage systems across territory, stretching from modern-day Afghanistan to Gujarat? Dr. Kenoyer's research shows no evidence of a centralized authority, no administrative buildings, no clear hierarchy. Yet somehow every city builder followed the exact same specifications. The script appears on seals from Shortagai in Afghanistan to Dholavira in India, suggesting a unified writing system across 2,000 miles of territory. Most puzzling is what's absent. Professor Jane McIntosh's 2008 analysis, The Ancient Indus Valley, New Perspectives, notes the complete lack of monumental architecture, royal tombs, or military fortifications found in every other Bronze Age civilization. The Harappans traded with Mesopotamia, leaving behind their seals in Sumerian cities. Mesopotamian texts mention the land of Melcha, likely referring to the Indus Valley. But while Mesopotamian records document kings, wars, and conquests, they contain no accounts of Harappan rulers or military campaigns. It's as if this vast empire existed in a parallel dimension, trading with the ancient world while leaving no political footprint whatsoever. When the cities were abandoned around 1300 before the Common Era, their inhabitants left behind no explanation, no final inscriptions, no record of where they went. Modern satellite imagery reveals the true scale of this disappearance. NASA and the Indian Space Research Organization have identified over 1,400 Harappan sites, most still unexcavated. These settlements appear and vanish from the archaeological record, with startling synchronicity across subcontinental distances. How does a civilization achieve perfect urban planning without centralized authority? Why did they build no monuments to their gods or kings? What does their undeciphered script actually say? Where did 5 million people go when their cities emptied? How do you disappear so completely that the world forgets you existed for 4,000 years? But the Harappans weren't the only empire to master the art of vanishing without explanation. Axumite Empire. You stand at the edge of what should be one of the greatest archaeological sites in Africa. The morning sun cuts across the Ethiopian highlands, illuminating massive granite obelisks that pierce the sky like ancient fingers. Each stone tower weighs hundreds of tons. Each was carved from a single block of granite. Each was transported here across impossible distances. But here's what stops you cold. Until 1906, the outside world had completely forgotten this place existed. For 8 centuries, the Axumite Empire controlled the Red Sea. They minted their own gold coins, they built multi-story palaces, they erected monuments that rival anything in Rome or Egypt. Then, sometime around 960 Common Era, they simply vanished from history. The rediscovery came through German archaeologist Enno Littmann, who published his findings in Deutsche Axum Expedition in 1913. What Littmann found challenged everything scholars thought they knew about ancient African civilizations. The site contained over 120 carved stelae, some reaching heights of 33 meters. The largest attempted obelisk, had it been completed, would have stood 37 meters tall and weighed over 500 tons. Dr. Stuart Munro Hay of the Institute of Archaeology documented in his 1991 work Axum, an African civilization of late antiquity, that the empire's influence stretched from modern-day Sudan to Yemen, controlling trade routes that connected Rome with India. The scale defies comprehension. The royal tombs contain elaborate stone-cut chambers with sophisticated drainage system. The coins bear inscriptions in Greek, Ge'ez, and South Arabian scripts, suggesting a cosmopolitan empire that spoke the languages of 3 continents. Archaeological evidence from Dr. Jackie Phillips' excavations, published in Ancient Ethiopia in 2012, reveals that Axum was mining and working iron by the 4th century Common Era, predating similar technology in many parts of Europe. The mainstream explanation attributes Axum's disappearance to the rise of Islam disrupting Red Sea trade routes, combined with environmental degradation from deforestation. Scholars like Dr. David Phillipson of Cambridge University, in his 2012 comprehensive study, Foundations of an African Civilization, argue that the empire gradually declined as trade shifted away from the Red Sea toward the Persian Gulf, eventually fragmenting into smaller kingdoms that merged into Ethiopian highland culture. But this explanation cannot account for the complete erasure of Axum from global memory. Major empires don't simply vanish from historical consciousness. The Romans traded with Axum for centuries. Pliny the Elder mentions it in his Natural History. Byzantine sources document diplomatic relations. Yet by the medieval period, even local Ethiopian chronicles barely reference the empire that once controlled their land. Dr. Sergiu Haile Selassie's research, published in Ancient and Medieval Ethiopian History to 1500 and 1972, reveals a puzzling gap in Ethiopian historical memory spanning nearly 4 centuries. Some researchers suggest the disappearance involved more than economic decline. The archaeological record shows evidence of sudden abandonment rather than gradual decay. Construction on major monuments stopped mid-project. Elite residences were abandoned with valuable items still inside. Dr. Ayele Bekari's linguistic analysis, detailed in Ethiopic and African Writing System in 1997, notes that even the Ge'ez script evolved in ways suggesting cultural disruption rather than natural linguistic development. The stones themselves present the greatest mystery. Moving 500-ton obelisks required engineering capabilities that scholars still struggle to explain. The precision of the carving suggests tools and techniques that exceed what archaeologists have found in the material record. The symbolic significance of the monuments, their astronomical alignments, their relationship to underground burial chambers suggests knowledge systems that disappeared along with the empire. Why would a civilization that dominated international commerce for 8 centuries leave so little trace in historical memory? How does an empire with diplomatic relations across 3 continents become completely forgotten? What happened in the 10th century that was so catastrophic it erased not just the empire but the memory of the empire? If environmental collapse and trade disruption explain Axum's fall, why didn't similar factors affect other Red Sea powers? Who had the motivation and capability to systematically erase 8 centuries of recorded history? The silence extends beyond Africa, reaching into the desert kingdoms that once flourished along the Silk Road, where entire languages would disappear as completely as Axum vanished from memory. Tocharian Kingdoms. You're crouched in a dusty storage room in Urumqi, 1907. The wooden crate before you contains something impossible. Your hands shake as you lift the lid. Inside lies a woman's face, perfectly preserved after 1,500 years. Blonde hair frames European features. But this is the heart of Central Asia, thousands of miles from any European settlement. The silk wrapped around her body bears writing in a script no living person can read. Swedish explorer Sven Hedin had stumbled upon the first of these mummies 3 years earlier while crossing the Taklamakan Desert. By 1906, archaeologist Aurel Stein was systematically excavating entire cemeteries of these impossible corpses. The dry desert had preserved not just their bodies, but their clothing, their tools, their manuscripts. Everything pointed to a thriving Indo-European civilization that had somehow flourished along the Silk Road for over 1,000 years, then vanished so completely that even their name was forgotten. The Tocharian Kingdoms controlled the northern branch of the Silk Road from approximately 200 before the Common Era to 1000 Common Era. Their cities, Karashar, Kucha, Turfan, were cosmopolitan centers where Buddhist monks debated theology in a language related to Celtic and Germanic tongues. German linguist Emil Sieg and Wilhelm Siegling spent decades deciphering their script, publishing their breakthrough work, Tocharian Grammatic, in 1921. They discovered the Tocharians called themselves Arshikushan and spoke 2 distinct but related languages, Tocharian A, which they termed Arshikushan, and Tocharian B, known as Kushian. Here's what makes their disappearance impossible to explain. These weren't nomadic tribes who could simply migrate elsewhere. The Tocharians built permanent cities, established complex irrigation systems, and created a sophisticated literary tradition. Archaeological evidence shows continuous occupation of their settlements for 8 centuries. Their manuscripts reveal detailed administrative records, Buddhist commentaries, and commercial documents dating right up to the 10th century. Then nothing. No conquest accounts, no migration records, no gradual decline. The cities were simply abandoned, their people scattered to places unknown. The mainstream explanation suggests the Tocharians were gradually absorbed by Turkic peoples moving westward during the early medieval period. Climate change may have disrupted their agriculture, forcing mass migration. The expansion of Islamic influence into Central Asia potentially displaced their Buddhist culture. Most historians argue they simply assimilated into other populations, their distinct identity dissolving over generations. But this explanation cannot account for the archaeological record's abrupt termination. If gradual assimilation occurred, we should find evidence of cultural mixing, hybrid artifacts, bilingual inscriptions, architectural transitions. Instead, Tocharian sites show sudden abandonment around 1000 Common Era. Personal belongings remain in houses as if inhabitants left expecting to return. Some researchers suggest a catastrophic event, perhaps drought, disease, or warfare, but no evidence supports any of these scenarios. Chinese chronicles, which meticulously recorded Silk Road politics, mention Tocharian kingdoms in the 9th century, then fall silent. Even the memory of their existence disappeared so thoroughly that Marco Polo, crossing their former territories 3 centuries later, recorded no oral traditions of their civilization. The genetic evidence deepens the mystery. DNA analysis of Tocharian mummies shows they possessed European markers, specifically Celtic and Germanic ancestry, dating to their arrival in Central Asia around 3000 before the Common Era. Yet, historical records place the earliest Indo-European migrations much later. How did people carrying European genes establish kingdoms in the Taklamakan Desert 2 millennia before conventional chronology suggests such contact was possible? And how do they maintain their distinct identity for over 1,000 years in one of the world's most isolated regions? Who were these blonde-haired Buddhists who spoke dead European languages in the heart of Asia? How does an entire civilization vanish without leaving enemies to celebrate their defeat? What happened during that final century that erased not just their cities, but their memory? Why do Chinese sources, so detailed about Silk Road politics, suddenly stop mentioning them? Their silence hints at larger patterns of disappearance that would soon consume civilizations across the Americas as well. Mississippian culture. You kneel at the base of Monk's Mound on a July morning in 1250, Common Era. The Earth Pyramid rises 100 feet above you, 10 million cubic yards of soil, each basket carried by hand. The plaza stretches before you for 40 acres, not empty, crowded with thousands, trading copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rockies. The heartbeat of a continent's commerce pounds through Cahokia's streets. Then silence. When French explorers reached the Mississippi Valley in 1673, they found grass-covered hills, nothing else. The greatest city north of Mexico had vanished. Father Jacques Marquette's journals describe curious mounds of earth, but no people to explain them, no stories, no memory of what had been. The scale of what disappeared defies comprehension. Dr. Timothy Pawcatat of the University of Illinois spent 30 years excavating Cahokia. His 2017 publication, Cahokia, Ancient America's Great City on the Mississippi, documents a civilization that controlled trade routes spanning 2,000 miles. Archaeological evidence reveals a population of 15 to 20,000 at Cahokia alone. Hundreds of satellite communities stretch from Minnesota to Louisiana. Carbon dating places the culture's peak between 1150 and 1250, Common Era. The engineering accomplishments were staggering. Monk's Mound contains more earth than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Grand Plaza was leveled to mathematical precision using only stone tools. Dr. Sarah Bears's ground-penetrating radar surveys revealed a wooden observatory called the American Woodhenge that tracks solstices and equinoxes with astronomical accuracy. The University of Wisconsin's recent LiDAR mapping identified over 100 earthen mounds at Cahokia alone. Trade networks connected communities across half a continent. Archaeologists have recovered Pacific Coast shells in Missouri burial mounds, Great Lakes copper in Alabama graves, Rocky Mountain obsidian in Tennessee ceremonial sites. The Mississippians controlled commerce on a scale not seen again until European colonization. Dr. George Milner's analysis of mortuary practices reveals a stratified society with elite burials containing thousands of exotic grave goods. The mainstream explanation centers on environmental collapse. Climate data shows the medieval warm period ended around 1250 Common Era. Cooler temperatures reduced crop yields. The Little Ice Age began. Population pressure exceeded agricultural capacity. Political upheaval followed. People gradually dispersed to smaller settlements. The urban centers were abandoned. Oral traditions were lost as communities scattered. But the archaeological record tells a different story. There's no evidence of gradual decline, no intermediate phases of reduced construction, no partially completed projects left behind. Dr. Pawcatat's excavations show intensive building activity right up until abandonment. Fresh construction, active trade, then nothing. The transition appears to have happened within a single generation. The silence is what haunts researchers. Native American oral traditions contain no memory of Cahokia. The Cherokee, Creek, and other southeastern tribes have detailed origin stories going back centuries. None mention the great mound builders. The Osage and other Plains tribes migrated through former Mississippian territories. Their stories are blank. It's as if the entire civilization was deliberately forgotten. Some researchers suggest the abandonment was intentional. Dr. Alice Beck Kehoe proposes that Mississippian elites orchestrated a coordinated evacuation, perhaps environmental stress, perhaps internal rebellion, perhaps external threats. The mounds were left as monuments. The people merged into existing tribes. Their stories were absorbed into new identities. The old names disappeared by design. The artifacts raise more questions than answers. Mississippian pottery shows influences from Mexico and the American Southwest. Shell engravings depict imagery similar to Mesoamerican codices. The burger figurines found in Missouri resemble Maya sculptures. Dr. James Brown's iconographic analysis suggests contact with civilizations thousands of miles away. Yet no Mississippian artifacts appear in Mesoamerican sites. The trade was one way. Recent discoveries compound the mystery. The 2011 excavation at Spiro Mounds in Oklahoma revealed a cache of engraved shells depicting complex mythological scenes. The artwork rivals anything produced in pre-Columbian America. Yet the iconography appears nowhere else. No comparable artistic tradition exists among known successor cultures. What could erase the memory of an entire civilization? How do 20,000 people abandon a city without leaving written records? Why would trade networks spanning half a continent simply stop? Where did the astronomical knowledge go? What became of the master builders? But Cahokia wasn't the only great power to vanish from historical memory in the ancient world. Elam, your spade strikes something hard beneath the Iranian sand. The year is 1969. The temperature hits 115 degrees. You're part of the French archaeological mission to Susa, led by Jean Perrot. The object emerges slowly from 3 millennia of silence, stone, carved, ancient beyond measure. You brush away the dust and see symbols that shouldn't exist, linear marks that flow like water across the surface, a complete writing system, undeciphered, unknown, the script of a civilization that ruled this land when Babylon was just a village, yet history barely remembers their name. The Elamites controlled southwestern Iran from approximately 3200 before the Common Era until their final absorption by the Persian Empire in 539 before the Common Era. That's 2,661 years of continuous civilization. Dr. François Villat of the French National Center for Scientific Research spent 4 decades studying Elamite inscriptions, publishing his definitive work, Les Noms géographiques des sources Suso-Elamites in 1993. His research revealed that Elam maintained diplomatic correspondence with every major power of the ancient world. The British Museum houses over 4,000 Elamite tablets. The Louvre contains another 3,000. Professor Matthew Stolper of the University of Chicago documented Elamite administrative archives spanning 8 centuries in his 2004 study, Elamite Administrative Archives from Persepolis. At its height, Elam stretched from the Zagros Mountains to the Persian Gulf. Their capital at Susa rivaled Babylon in size and sophistication. They built ziggurats that touched the sky. They developed metallurgy techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered for centuries. Their armies conquered Babylon multiple times, carrying away the famous Code of Hammurabi as war booty. They minted coins. They established trade networks reaching to India and Central Asia. They ruled an empire larger than modern France for longer than the Roman Empire existed. The mainstream explanation suggests that Elam's disappearance resulted from gradual Persian assimilation combined with the natural decay of time. Archaeological evidence shows continuous Persian settlement in former Elamite territories after 539 before the Common Era. The last known Elamite inscription dates to approximately 300 before the Common Era, indicating a slow linguistic death rather than sudden cultural extinction. Most ancient civilizations, historians argue, fade through integration rather than catastrophic collapse. But the silence runs deeper than gradual assimilation explains. The linear Elamite script remains completely undeciphered, despite containing over 40 distinct symbols and appearing on hundreds of artifacts. Dr. François Desset of the University of Tehran announced a potential breakthrough in 2021, claiming to have identified phonetic values for several signs. Yet his work remains disputed. No Rosetta Stone exists for Elamite. No bilingual texts have been discovered. It's as if an entire intellectual tradition vanished without leaving a translation key. More troubling is the archaeological vacuum. Susa, once a metropolis of hundreds of thousands, shows clear signs of deliberate abandonment. The royal palaces weren't destroyed by fire or earthquake, they were systematically emptied. The treasure chambers stand bare. The archives were removed so thoroughly that even clay tablet fragments are rare. Professor David Stronach's excavations at Susa between 1969 and 1979 revealed architectural sequences that simply stop. No gradual decline. No evidence of siege or natural disaster. The city was functioning fully one generation, then empty the next. The Elamite king lists, preserved in Mesopotamian sources, record 43 rulers across 14 dynasties. Yet not a single royal tomb has been identified, not one crown, not one royal seal intact in its burial context. The French archaeological mission has excavated Susa continuously since 1897. They found administrative quarters, residential districts, craft workshops, religious complexes. They found everything except the people who built it all. Even the memory was erased with surgical precision. Mesopotamian sources mention Elam constantly until the 6th century, before the Common Era, then nothing. Persian royal inscriptions at Persepolis list dozens of subject peoples. The Elamites aren't mentioned. Greek historians who documented every minor tribe along their path to India don't record meeting anyone who remembered Elamite traditions. It's as if 3 millennia of civilization simply stepped off the stage of history. The Elamites spoke a language unrelated to any known linguistic family. They worshipped gods whose names appear nowhere else. They developed artistic styles that influenced Mesopotamia for centuries, then vanished without descendants. They created technologies that their neighbors adopted but couldn't replicate once the source disappeared. What force can make 43 dynasties disappear so completely that scholars debate whether they ever existed? How does a civilization that survived the Bronze Age collapse? The Sea Peoples and repeated Babylonian invasions just stop. Who removed every royal burial with such thoroughness that archaeologists can't find so much as a crown fragment? Why did the Persians, who typically celebrated conquered peoples in their inscriptions, pretend the Elamites had never existed? What did they know about disappearing that we've forgotten? An empire that mastered vanishing completely would prove that erasure, like empire building, could be an art form. Srivijaya Empire. You stand on the deck of a Tang Dynasty merchant vessel in the year 850. The Malacca Strait stretches before you, its waters glittering under the tropical sun. Your ship carries porcelain from Guangzhou, silk from Hangzhou, and silver from the imperial treasury. But you cannot pass, not without permission from the most powerful maritime empire the world has ever known. Srivijayan warboats emerge from hidden river mouths, their crews speaking a dozen languages, their hulls bristling with weapons forged from Indian steel. For 7 centuries, no merchant sailed these waters without paying tribute to Srivijaya. Yet today, archaeologists struggle to locate where this empire even stood. The mystery deepened when French scholar Georges Coedes published his groundbreaking analysis in Les États induisés d'Indochine et d'Indonésie in 1948. Coedes had assembled every Chinese chronicle, every Sanskrit inscription, every Arabic travelogue that mentioned Srivijaya. The sources were unanimous. This was the dominant power of Southeast Asia from 650 to 1377. Chinese records describe Srivijayan envoys arriving at the imperial court with tributes of gold, rhinoceros horn, and exotic birds. The monk Aitzing wrote detailed accounts of studying Buddhism at Srivijayan universities, describing a cosmopolitan empire where scholars from across Asia gathered to translate Sanskrit texts. Arab geographers, like Ibn Battuta, documented Srivijayan ports where ships from India, China, and the Middle East converged to trade spices, precious stones, and textiles. But when 20th century archaeologists went looking for Srivijaya's capital, they found nothing. Dr. Herman Kulke of the University of Kiel spent decades searching Sumatra's coastline, following every clue in the historical record. His 1993 monograph, A History of Srivijaya, documented the problem. An empire that controlled maritime trade across Southeast Asia for over 700 years had somehow vanished without leaving monumental architecture, palace complexes, or even substantial urban ruins. The breakthrough came in 1975 when archaeologist Bambang Budi Utomo began excavating at Muara Takus in Riau province. His team uncovered brick temple foundations, Chinese ceramics, and Sanskrit inscriptions that finally placed Srivijaya in eastern Sumatra. subsequent excavations by Dr. Pierre-Yves Monguin of the École Française d'Extrême-Orient revealed harbor installations and trading posts scattered along multiple river systems. Radiocarbon dating confirmed occupation from the 7th to 14th centuries. But even these discoveries raised more questions than they answered. The mainstream explanation is that Srivijaya was a thalassocratic empire, a sea-based confederation of ports rather than a traditional land-based kingdom. This maritime model explains why archaeologists find trading posts and harbor facilities rather than massive stone cities. The empire's wealth came from controlling strategic waterways and taxing merchant vessels, not from agriculture or territorial conquest. When Portuguese and Dutch colonial powers established permanent bases with superior naval technology, Srivijaya's decentralized structure couldn't compete, and the empire fragmented into smaller sultanates. But this explanation cannot account for the systematic erasure of Srivijayan cultural memory. Dr. Kenneth Hall of Ball State University documented in his 2011 study, A History of Early Southeast Asia, that neighboring Khmer and Javanese civilizations maintained detailed historical chronicles and oral traditions spanning centuries. Why would a maritime empire that lasted 700 years leave no comparable historical consciousness among its successor populations? Chinese sources describe Srivijayan rulers commanding fleets of hundreds of vessels and maintaining diplomatic relations with multiple Chinese dynasties, yet no Malay historical texts preserve memories of this imperial past. Archaeological evidence suggests something more deliberate. Dr. John Mixick's excavations at multiple Srivijayan sites revealed that stone monuments and inscriptions were systematically destroyed or removed in the 14th and 15th centuries. His 2013 analysis in Southeast Asian archaeology documented tool marks consistent with intentional demolition on surviving temple foundations. Carbon dating of destruction layers corresponds precisely with the rise of Majapahit power and the arrival of Islamic sultanates. Some researchers suggest that Srivijaya's Hindu-Buddhist identity made it a target for systematic erasure by both Islamic conquerors and later Dutch colonial administrators who preferred dealing with smaller, manageable kingdoms. Others point to the empire's role as middleman in the opium and slave trade's economic activities that successor states had incentives to forget. How does a maritime empire that controlled the most valuable trade routes in Asia disappear so completely from historical memory? Why do the destruction layers at Srivijayan sites show evidence of systematic demolition rather than natural decay? What happened to the thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts that Chinese pilgrims describe studying in Srivijayan libraries? Who gave the orders to erase 7 centuries of imperial history? And why did the erasure succeed so thoroughly that even local populations forgot their ancestors once ruled the seas? The Nuragic towers of Sardinia present an equally puzzling case of vanished knowledge. Nuragic civilization. You stand before a stone giant rising from the Sardinian hills. The granite blocks fit together with mathematical precision. No mortar holds them, no gaps exist between the stones. The tower stretches 40 feet into the Mediterranean sky, its corbelled dome, a testament to engineering mastery that predates Rome by over 1,000 years. 7,000 of these structures dot the island. Someone built them, someone vanished, someone left behind only silence carved in stone. The Nuragic of Su-Nuraxi towers above you, its central keep surrounded by a maze of secondary towers and defensive walls. The stones weigh tons. They were cut, transported, and fitted with techniques that archaeologists Giovanni Liliu of the University of Cagliari documented in his 1988 comprehensive survey La civiltà dei Sardi dal Paleolitico all'età dei Nuraghi. Each block was shaped to lock with its neighbors through precise angles and weight distribution. The towers required no foundation deeper than 3 feet. Yet, they have stood for 3.5 millennia. Dr. Fulvio Lo Schiavo's 1998 excavations at Barumini revealed bronze figurines depicting warriors, ships, and mysterious horned figures performing unknown rituals. The Nuragic people cast bronze with sophistication that matched contemporary civilizations in the Eastern Mediterranean. They built villages, fortresses, temples, and tombs. They traded with Mycenaean Greeks, Phoenicians, and Etruscans. Archaeological evidence from sites across Sardinia confirms they controlled maritime trade routes throughout the Western Mediterranean from 1800 to 238 before the Common Era. But here's what makes this impossible. They left no decipherable written language. Every other Bronze Age civilization that achieved this level of architectural and metallurgical sophistication developed writing systems. The Minoans had Linear A, the Mycenaeans adapted Linear B. The Phoenicians created alphabetic scripts that spread across the Mediterranean. Yet the Nuragic civilization, which built more monumental stone architecture per square mile than anywhere else in Europe, recorded nothing in words that modern scholars can read. The mainstream explanation is that the Nuragic people were a purely oral culture that relied on spoken tradition to transmit knowledge across generations. They focused their creative energy on stone and bronze, rather than written symbols. Their isolation on Sardinia meant they had less contact with literate civilizations, and thus less pressure to develop writing systems. But the evidence contradicts this oral-only theory. The Nuragic people weren't isolated. Dr. Anna de Palmas's 2006 analysis of trade goods at Nuragic sites documented Egyptian scarabs, Baltic amber, and Iberian silver. They maintained extensive contact with literate civilizations for over a millennium. They possessed the cognitive sophistication to engineer corbelled domes that required complex mathematical calculations. They created bronze sculptures with narrative scenes suggesting rich mythological traditions. Yet they supposedly never felt compelled to record any of this knowledge in permanent form. Some researchers suggest the Nuragic civilization did develop writing, but used perishable materials that haven't survived Sardinia's climate. Others propose their stone towers themselves functioned as a three-dimensional writing system, with architectural elements encoding information that we haven't learned to decode. The positioning of Nuragic across the landscape follows patterns that may represent territorial markers, astronomical alignments, or communication networks. The mystery deepens with the civilization's disappearance. Roman sources describe conquering Sardinia in 238 before the Common Era, but they mention no great battles, no mass deportations, no systematic destruction of Nuragic culture. The people simply fade from the historical record. The towers remain, but their builders vanish as completely as if they had never existed. Why would a civilization capable of engineering marvels choose to remain silent? How do you transmit complex architectural knowledge across 15 centuries without written records? What happened to the descendants of the tower builders? If the Nuragic encode information, what secrets do 7,000 stone towers hold? Can an entire people simply dissolve into the landscape they once dominated? The silent stones of Sardinia guard their secrets as carefully as another vanished empire did along the Silk Road, where merchants spoke a language that would disappear just as completely from the pages of history. Sogdian Empire. You step off the camel into the bazaar at Samarkand, and the sound hits you first. 20 different languages mixing in the morning air. A Sogdian merchant argues price with a Tang Dynasty silk trader in fluent Chinese. Behind them, another Sogdian switches seamlessly to Persian, then Greek, then Arabic as customers approach his stall. The year is 850 of the Common Era. You're witnessing something that shouldn't exist in the medieval world. A commercial empire built not on conquest, but on the simple power of speaking everyone's language. For 3 centuries, the Sogdians dominated the Silk Road through pure mercantile genius. Professor Étienne de la Vessière of the École Pratique des Hautes Études published his groundbreaking study, Sogdian Traders, A History, in 2005, documenting how these Central Asian merchants established trading posts from Chang'an to Constantinople. Their letters, preserved in the dry sands of the Taklamakan Desert, reveal a network of unprecedented sophistication. Dr. Nicholas Sims Williams of the School of Oriental and African Studies translated documents showing Sogdian firms operating with credit systems, insurance policies, and standardized weights across distances of over 4,000 miles. The archaeological evidence paints an empire unlike any other in human history. Professor Pavel Lurge's excavations at Penji, Kent, published in the Culture and Social Institutions of Ancient Sogd in 2001, revealed cities with advanced urban planning, sophisticated irrigation systems, and artwork depicting merchants from every corner of the known world. The Sogdian language became the diplomatic tongue of choice across Central Asia. Chinese imperial records from the Tang Dynasty show that Sogdian interpreters were essential for all major trade negotiations. But here's what makes their disappearance impossible to explain. They vanished completely between 900 and 1000 of the Common Era, leaving behind cities buried so thoroughly under sand that some weren't rediscovered until the 20th century. Dr. Boris Marshak's excavations, documented in Legends, Tales, and Fables in the Art of Sogdiana, published in 2002, found layers of sand up to 15 feet deep covering palatial structures that showed no signs of siege, fire, or gradual abandonment. The mainstream explanation is environmental collapse. Scholars like Richard Foltz in Religions of the Silk Road argue that climate change shifted trade routes, dried up rivers, and made the desert cities uninhabitable. The rise of maritime trade routes around the Arabian Peninsula reduced demand for overland Silk Road commerce, gradually choking off Sogdian prosperity until their cities were simply abandoned to the advancing sands. But the evidence contradicts this neat narrative. Professor Franz Grenet's analysis of Sogdian coins, published in the Bulletin of the Asia Institute in 1998, shows no gradual economic decline. Coin production remained steady, even increasing in some mints, right up until it stopped completely around 950 of the Common Era. The Sogdian letters found at Dunhuang, translated by Dr. Yoshida Yutaka in Sogdian Contracts from Turfan in 2006, show thriving businesses planning long-term investments just decades before the cities were abandoned. Most puzzling of all, the Chinese histories that meticulously recorded the rise and fall of every Central Asian kingdom make no mention of Sogdian collapse, civil war, or conquest. They simply stop mentioning Sogdians entirely, as if an empire that had dominated Silk Road trade for 3 centuries had never existed. Some researchers suggest that the Sogdians didn't disappear, but dispersed so completely into other cultures that they became invisible. Dr. Michael McCormick's economic analysis in Origins of the European Economy proposes that Sogdian merchants simply adapted to new trade patterns, abandoning their homeland for permanent settlement in distant cities. Others point to the Islamic conquests as disrupting traditional Zoroastrian Sogdian society. But these theories cannot explain why prosperous cities would be abandoned so suddenly and so completely that sand dunes reach the tops of their walls. How does a commercial empire that controlled the world's most lucrative trade routes simply cease to exist? Why would merchants who had adapted to every political change for 3 centuries suddenly abandon cities that showed no signs of siege or disaster? What happened to the vast wealth accumulated in Sogdian treasuries, never to be found by Archeers? Where did the most linguistically gifted traders in human history go when they left behind their buried cities? How do you erase a people who spoke the language of international commerce? The sands of Central Asia hold empires that prospered not through conquest, but through conversation, leaving behind only whispers of tongues that once negotiated the fate of nations. Meroitic Kingdom. You stand in the shadow of the Bagravia Pyramids, 300 kilometers north of Khartoum. The Sudanese sun beats down on weathered sandstone as you count the structures rising from the desert floor. 1 pyramid, 5, 15, 30. Your guide tells you there are more than 250 pyramids scattered across this landscape, more than Egypt ever built. But these belong to a civilization most people have never heard of. The inscriptions covering every surface should tell their story. Thousands upon thousands of carved symbols in neat, precise rows. They look almost familiar. Some resemble Egyptian hieroglyphs, others feel entirely alien. You run your fingers along the stone, tracing characters that scholars have been staring at for over a century. They can read the royal names, identify a few dozen words, but the vast majority remains as mysterious as the day British archaeologist John Garstang first documented them in 1910. This is Kush, the Meroitic Kingdom, an empire that ruled the Nile for over 1,000 years, conquered Egypt, and then vanished so completely that their own written language died with them. The kingdom emerged around 800 before the Common Era in what is now Sudan, with its capital at Meroe on the east bank of the Nile. Archaeological evidence documented by teams from the University of Liverpool and Sudan's National Corporation for Antiquities and Museums shows sophisticated urban planning, extensive ironworking facilities, and trade networks reaching from the Mediterranean to sub-Saharan Africa. The Meroites developed their own writing system around 300, before the Common Era, a cursive script containing 23 symbols that appears on everything from royal stelae to pottery fragments. Between 700 and 650 before the Common Era, under pharaoh kings like Piye and Taharqa, the Kushites conquered Egypt and ruled as the 25th dynasty. Assyrian records from this period, translated by scholars including Kenneth Kitchen of the University of Liverpool, document fierce resistance from these Ethiopian pharaohs who controlled both kingdoms for nearly a century. When forced to retreat south by Assyrian invasion around 663 before the Common Era, they established Meroe as their new power center and continued ruling an empire stretching over 1,000 kilometers along the Nile. Dr. Claude Rilly of the French National Center for Scientific Research has identified approximately 1,200 Meroitic texts, ranging from monumental inscriptions to funerary stelae to everyday pottery sherds. The script combines alphabetic and syllabic elements, written both left to right and right to left. Researchers can read royal names like Amanirenas and Natakamani, recognize words for king and water and good, but comprehensive translation remains impossible. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, cracked through the trilingual Rosetta Stone, no bilingual text has ever been found for Meroitic script. The mainstream explanation attributes this linguistic isolation to Mero's gradual separation from Egypt and the Mediterranean world. As the kingdom developed independently, scholars argue, their language evolved beyond recognition, while their writing system became increasingly specialized for local use. When the kingdom fell to Axumite invasion around 350 Common Era, the language simply died out, taking its secrets with it. But the sheer volume of undeciphered texts suggests something more systematic than gradual linguistic drift. Recent analysis by the Meroitic Studies Group has revealed consistent grammatical structures and recurring formulaic phrases that indicate a sophisticated literary tradition. The language appears on everything from royal chronicles to legal documents to religious texts, yet shows no meaningful overlap with any known African or Semitic language family. Dr. Joost Hagen of the University of Vienna notes that certain inscriptions display mathematical precision in their character spacing and line arrangement that suggests deliberate encryption or sacred significance beyond mere communication. The archaeological record raises additional questions. Excavations at Meroe between 1965 and 1998 by the Royal Ontario Museum revealed evidence of advanced metallurgy, including slag heaps indicating industrial-scale iron production that supplied much of northeastern Africa. Yet no technical manuals, no craftsmen's records, no administrative documents explaining these innovations have ever been translated. The kingdom that built more pyramids than Egypt, conquered the pharaohs, and supplied iron tools across half a continent left behind thousands of texts that might as well be alien writing. How does an entire literary language vanish so completely that its own cultural descendants cannot read it? What knowledge died with those final Meroitic scribes? Did they deliberately obscure their most important records? Why would a civilization that documented everything, from royal victories to grain transactions, suddenly become unreadable to history? But the Meroites were not alone in developing writing systems that outlasted the civilizations that created them, as the mysterious scripts found along Spain's ancient coastline would soon demonstrate Tartessian civilization. You're standing in a Roman archive in the 2nd century Common Era, scrolling through papyrus rolls that smell of cedar oil and age. Your finger traces across a passage by Strabo, describing ships so heavy with silver they had to replace their lead anchors with pure metal just to carry more cargo home. Another scroll mentions King Arganthonios, who supposedly ruled for 80 years and lived to be 120, his kingdom so rich that visiting merchants couldn't believe the abundance. The Greeks called it Tartessos. The Romans knew it as Tartessus. Every ancient source agrees on one impossible thing. This was the wealthiest civilization anyone had ever seen, built on silver mines so productive they made kings across the Mediterranean weep with envy. Then you realize something else impossible. For all their detailed descriptions of unimaginable wealth, not one ancient author can tell you exactly where this kingdom was. The search for Tartessos has consumed Spanish archaeologists for over a century. Dr. Maria Eugenia Obet of the Pompeu Fabra University published her comprehensive analysis in The Phoenicians and the West in 1993, cataloging every ancient reference to this mysterious kingdom. Herodotus placed it beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Pliny the Elder described it as a major trading partner of Phoenician merchants. The Bible itself may reference it as Tarshish, the distant land of silver and gold that sent ships to trade with King Solomon. Professor Antonio Blanco Fragero's excavations at Huelva in the 1970s uncovered Bronze Age foundations and Phoenician pottery dating to the 8th century before the Common Era. His team found evidence of massive metallurgical operations, slag heaps containing traces of silver processing, and trade goods from across the Mediterranean. But the settlement was far too small to match the ancient descriptions of a mighty kingdom. Here's what makes Tartessos archaeologically impossible. The ancient sources describe a civilization that controlled the entire southwestern corner of the Iberian Peninsula, commanded vast fleets, and produced silver on an industrial scale for over 500 years. Yet, despite decades of intensive archaeological survey across Andalusia and southern Portugal, no site has been discovered that matches even half the scope described in ancient texts. The mainstream archaeological explanation suggests that Tartessos was never a single kingdom, but rather a collective name the Greeks and Romans used for the various indigenous settlements along the Guadalquivir River basin. These communities, enriched by their control of local silver mines, traded extensively with Phoenician merchants who established coastal trading posts. Over time, the stories of their wealth became exaggerated and mythologized, creating the legend of a single, fabulously rich kingdom that never actually existed, as described. But this explanation cannot account for the consistency of ancient sources spanning 6 centuries of writing. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, provides specific details about Tartessian ships and their cargo. Strabo, writing 4 centuries later, offers complementary information about their mining operations and political structure. The Roman poet Avienus, working from earlier Greek sources now lost, describes specific geographical features and trade routes. These aren't vague legends growing through retelling. They're detailed, consistent accounts from multiple independent sources. Some researchers suggest that rising sea levels and river sedimentation have buried the main Tartessian cities beneath meters of alluvium in the Guadalquivir Delta. Dr. Richard Freund of the University of Hartford's expedition since 2005 have used ground-penetrating radar to identify geometric anomalies buried beneath the marshlands of Doñana National Park. His team claims to have detected massive rectangular structures aligned in urban patterns, but Spanish authorities have blocked full excavation of the protected wetlands. The Tartessian script compounds the mystery. Over 90 inscriptions have been discovered across southern Spain and Portugal, written in a unique syllabic system that appears related to Phoenician characters, but follows completely different linguistic patterns. Despite intensive analysis by epigraphers, including Dr. John Koch of the University of Wales and Professor Jürgen Untermann of the University of Cologne, the script remains completely undeciphered. The inscriptions appear on everything from stone monuments to bronze tablets, suggesting a literate civilization sophisticated enough to maintain extensive written records. What happened to a kingdom wealthy enough to make Mediterranean empires jealous? How does a civilization that mined silver for 5 centuries vanish so completely that we cannot even locate its capital? Why do the Tartessian inscriptions resist every attempt at translation, as if the language itself was designed to keep its secrets? Can an entire kingdom disappear beneath Spanish soil, waiting for archaeologists brave enough to dig where governments forbid them to look? And what other impossible civilizations might be sleeping beneath our feet, erased so completely that we remember them only as myths? We have reached the edge of documented history, where civilizations vanish into silence so complete it defies explanation. 10 civilizations, 10,000 years of human achievement. 10 complete erasures from memory, not conquered and absorbed, not gradually declined and forgotten, erased, as if someone took an eraser to the historical record and methodically removed every trace of their existence until only fragments remained buried in the earth. The Harappan cities with their advanced drainage systems, Aksum's towering obelisks, the Silk Road kingdoms that connected east and west, the great mound builders of North America. Each one a sophisticated civilization that should have left mountains of evidence. Each one reduced to whisperers and archaeological puzzles that make no sense according to our understanding of how civilizations rise and fall. What connects them is not their geography, or their time period, or their technology. What connects them is the completeness of their disappearance. Real civilizations leave messy traces. They influence their neighbors. Their languages survive in fragments. Their gods get absorbed into other pantheons. Their trade goods show up in distant lands for centuries afterward. But these 10 civilizations vanish so thoroughly that we only rediscovered them by accident. A farmer's plow hits a Harappan seal. A colonial administrator notices strange ruins in the jungle. An archaeologist realizes the earthworks aren't natural hills. Each discovery forces us to redraw the map of human history, to admit that vast, sophisticated societies existed in complete isolation from our historical narrative. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that these aren't exceptions. Perhaps this is normal. Perhaps the historical record we trust is nothing more than the stories told by the survivors, the civilizations that happen to leave the right kind of evidence in the right places for us to find. How many others are still out there, waiting under parking lots and farmland and shopping centers? How many entire chapters of human achievement have we lost not to time, but to our own inability to see what doesn't fit our expectations? 10 civilizations disappeared without a trace. The question isn't how they vanished. The question is how many more we haven't found yet.